I'm Robert Harris, 71 years old, and what I'm about to recount is a tale that's haunted me for decades. This story kicked off back in 1987, during my days as a park ranger in Wyoming's vast Bighorn National Forest. Known for its rich wildlife and stunning vistas, this place was a striking contrast to the bustling city life I had left behind. I was quite new to this job, having been there only a few months, but I quickly grew to love the serene isolation it offered, a welcome change from the urban clamor of my youth. On a crisp morning in early October, my task was to inspect some remote campsites following reports of illegal hunting and suspected poaching. It was the height of hunting season, so we were on high alert. After packing my gear and grabbing the standard issue rifle, which I seldom used, I set out. I began my day at the ranger station with paperwork and a quick breakfast. 4 of us were on duty, though we typically worked alone, checking in periodically via radio to keep track of each other. My first destination was Whisper Canyon, a name that always sparked my curiosity, though I never did inquire about its origin. By mid-morning, I had reached the canyon. It was unsettlingly quiet. No bird song, no rustle of leaves, just an eerie silence that felt like the calm before a storm. I stumbled upon signs of recent activity. A still smoldering campfire, discarded beer cans, and food wrappers. Nothing extraordinary, just the usual signs of negligent campers. Just as I was about to radio in my findings, a rustle in the underbrush caught my attention. Expecting wildlife, I turned, only to have my blood run cold at the sight before me. It was a man, or so it seemed, tall and thin. His long, unkempt hair and overly large eyes gave him an otherworldly appearance. His pale, almost ghost-like skin contrasted starkly with his ragged clothes, which looked as though they'd been through a great ordeal. "Hey you," I called out assertively, trying to sound authoritative. "This area is off limits. You need to leave." He didn't respond, just stood there, staring at me with those unnerving eyes. I took a step closer, instinctively reaching for my rifle. "You need to leave," I repeated. That's when he moved. It happened in a flash. One moment he was still, the next he was right in front of me, his hand on my rifle. We struggled briefly, but his strength was immense. I managed to push him back and create some distance. "Get out of here!" I shouted, my heart pounding. He remained motionless, continuing to stare blankly. I slowly backed away, keeping my rifle aimed at him, until I felt safe enough to turn and sprint back to my truck. Breathless, I radioed in the encounter. A search team was dispatched, but no trace of the man or any footprints were found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. My colleague suggested I might have been spooked by a hiker or poacher, but I knew what I had seen was real. That night, sleep eluded me, haunted by the memory of his piercing eyes. The next day, I returned to the canyon with 2 colleagues, but our search turned up nothing. I began to question my own sanity. Days later, while on another patrol, I received a disturbing radio report from another ranger, Kevin Harrow, about a grim discovery at a remote campsite. I rushed to the location and found Kevin visibly shaken, standing at the edge of a clearing. "What is it?" I asked, trying to remain composed. He pointed to the ground. "Look," he said. What lay before us was the remains of a body, torn apart in a savage manner. The kind of scene one expects in horror films, not real life. As I reached for my radio to call this in, I caught a glimpse of a figure at the edge of the trees. The same man from the canyon, watching us with that same blank, unsettling expression. "Kevin, look," I whispered, pointing towards the figure. But by the time Kevin looked, the man had disappeared, just as before. We reported the incident, and soon the area was teeming with police and forensic teams. They identified the remains as those of a local hunter who had been reported missing a week earlier. The cause of death was unclear, but the brutality of the scene left little doubt that it was a violent end. The investigation continued for weeks, but no leads or suspects were found. Life in the forest eventually returned to its quiet routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. About a month later, while on patrol near Echo Falls, a picturesque spot known for its cascading waterfalls and lush greenery, I hoped the serene surroundings would help clear my mind. As I walked along the trail, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see another ranger, but instead, it was him, the man from the canyon, now just a few feet away. This time he was closer, and I could see his features more clearly, his clothes more tattered, his skin paler, but it was his eyes, dark, almost black, that truly unnerved me. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my composure. He didn't reply, but took a step closer. I raised my rifle, warning him to stay back. He advanced another step, and I fired. The shot echoed through the forest, but when the smoke cleared, he was gone. No blood, no body, as if he had never been there. Shaken, I stood there, wondering if I was losing my mind. Had I imagined everything? I reported hearing a noise and firing a warning shot, but I omitted mentioning the man. They suggested I take a break, citing stress, but I knew it was more than that. I was being hunted. In the weeks that followed, I saw him several more times, always from a distance, always watching. My grasp on reality began to slip. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those dark, soulless eyes. Then one night, everything came to a head. I was at home, trying to relax with a beer and some TV, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was amiss. Feeling that uneasy sensation of being watched, I got up to check the locks on my doors and windows. That's when I spotted him outside, just beyond the reach of the porch light. I grabbed my rifle and dashed outside. "Who are you? What do you want?" I yelled, but he just stood there, silently observing me. I raised my rifle, ready to defend myself, but before I could pull the trigger, he lunged. We struggled fiercely, his icy, clammy hands tightening around my throat. Just as I was about to give in to his overwhelming strength, a gunshot rang out. The man released his grip and stumbled backward. I wheeled around to see Jake, my fellow ranger, with his rifle drawn. He had come after me, worried about my safety after all the eerie incidents. "Are you okay?" he asked, rushing to my side. I nodded, catching my breath. "I think so, thank you." We scanned the area, but the man had vanished without a trace. No blood, no signs of his presence, just like before. Jake helped me back inside, and we called the authorities. They conducted a thorough search, but came up empty-handed. After that night, the sightings ceased. I never encountered the man again, and gradually, life seemed to return to normal. However, the unnerving feeling that he might still be out there lingered. Not long afterward, I decided to leave the Ranger service and move to another state, hoping to leave those disturbing memories behind. As the years passed, I tried to put that time in the Bighorn National Forest out of my mind. Yet occasionally, I catch a fleeting glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a shadow or a figure that looked disturbingly familiar. I would turn, half expecting to see him, but there was never anything there. To this day, I remain unsure who or what that man was. Was he a spectral figure, a ghost, or merely a disturbed individual? The truth remains elusive, but one thing is certain. I have no intention of returning to those woods. As I sit here now, an older man recounting this tale, I ponder the nature of reality and the mysteries that lie just beyond our perception. Despite extensive research into similar occurrences and the rich history of strange events in the Bighorn National Forest, nothing quite matches my experiences. The man, if he was indeed just a man, seemed to exist in a realm between ours and another, able to appear and disappear at will, move with superhuman speed, and leave no trace of his existence. I often think about the hunter we found. Was he a victim of this entity, or is there another explanation, mundane yet equally terrifying, for his death? The case remains unsolved, and I doubt it will ever be resolved. Kevin, the ranger who saved me that night, and I have kept in touch. He's one of the few who truly believes my story, having witnessed the entity himself. We occasionally meet, usually over a beer, and reminisce about those strange days in the forest. He's had his own odd encounters since then, though nothing as intense as what we experienced together. I've never returned to the Bighorn National Forest. The mere thought of going back fills me with an indescribable dread. Yet on quiet nights, As the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, my thoughts drift back to those vast, silent woods and the secrets they keep. To those who might dismiss this as the ramblings of an old man or the product of an overactive imagination, I offer this thought. The world is far stranger and more mysterious than we can imagine. The veil between what we know and what remains hidden can sometimes be terrifyingly thin. So, if you ever find yourself in the wilderness, savoring the beauty and solitude, remember my story. If you feel watched, if you catch a glimpse of something inexplicable, do not dismiss it. Sometimes the monsters are real, and they are always watching. Marcus had never missed work without notifying his boss, so when Bob called me concerned about his absence, I immediately sensed trouble. I drove to Marcus' quaint clay house at the edge of town. His truck was missing from the driveway, and knocking elicited no response. Using the spare key Marcus had once given me, I entered his home. Inside, everything seemed untouched. There were no signs of a forced or rushed exit. His phone lay on the counter, its battery drained. I then headed to see Lisa, Marcus' girlfriend. She last saw him on Sunday night during their dinner together. Visibly upset, Lisa shared their plans for a camping trip the upcoming weekend. I spent the day calling anyone who might know his whereabouts, but no one had seen Marcus since that Monday afternoon. The last confirmed sighting was at the Pine Ridge fuel station at the edge of town. The attendant, a young guy named Steve, recalled Marcus stopping to fill up his truck and grabbing some snacks. Steve noted that Marcus seemed okay, perhaps a bit preoccupied, but nothing alarming. As darkness fell, we filed a missing person report with the local police. Officer Maria Lopez took detailed notes and assured us that the search would commence at dawn. However, I couldn't stand by idly. Marcus was more like a brother to me than a cousin. If he was in trouble, it was up to me to help him. I rose before sunrise on Wednesday, packing my trusty Chevy Silverado with essentials: water, food, a first aid kit, flashlights, and some blankets. Knowing the harshness of the desert, I wanted to be prepared for any scenario. My first stop was back at the Pine Ridge fuel station. Steve was there again, looking tired from the early shift. He didn't have much new information, but did remember that Marcus had headed west on Highway 87 after leaving. Highway 87 runs like a lonely strip of tarmac, slicing through the vast desert. I drove slowly, scanning the road edges for any signs of Marcus' truck or signs of an accident. The sun rose higher, intensifying the desert heat. I checked every possible detour and small road branching off the main highway. The sheer scale of the desert magnified the challenge. Marcus could be anywhere. It was late afternoon when I spotted something heart-stopping. Off the main road, behind a cluster of giant saguaros, lay the remains of an old structure. Drawing closer, I realized it was a forsaken trading post, a forgotten piece of history from when the area thrived. The place had an ominous feel. The air was denser, almost tangible. I parked my Chevy and called out for Marcus, but only my echo answered, reverberating off the crumbling walls of the trading post. The building looked as if it had been abandoned for decades. The windows were shattered, sand had built up against the walls, and a pervasive smell of decay greeted me as I entered. I carefully navigated through the debris, scattered old newspapers, broken furniture, and cans left by squatters or daring youths. In what seemed to be the back office, my heart sank. Hanging on a corroded nail was a jacket, undoubtedly Marcus. It was a gift from me last year on his birthday. The jacket was ripped in several places, stained with what looked unmistakably like dried blood. Shaking, I took the jacket off the nail. There was no question now. Marcus had been here, and he had faced some serious trouble. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I knew I had to return to town to show this to the police. Yet, as I left the trading post, something else caught my attention. Fresh footprints led from the building into the deeper desert. These weren't Marcus. I was familiar with his from our hunting trips. These footprints were unlike any I had ever seen, longer and narrower than those of any human. As the sun dipped below the horizon, it painted the sky with vibrant shades of orange and purple. Every instinct urged me to retreat to my truck and head back to Sandstone. Yet I couldn't leave, not when I was possibly so close to finding Marcus. I grabbed a bottle of water, my flashlight, and a small first aid kit from the truck, and, against my better judgment, began following the peculiar footprints into the encroaching darkness. The trail led me to a narrow canyon, a deep cut in the earth hidden from the roadside view. The canyon walls rose steeply, blocking out the fading daylight. I paused at the entrance, my flashlight's beam feeble in the deepening gloom. "Marcus!" I called, my voice echoing off the stone walls. There was no reply, though I thought I heard a faint sound like fabric brushing against stone. Ignoring the chill that ran down my spine, I entered the canyon, moving cautiously as the air turned cooler and the silence grew heavy, broken only by my footsteps and labored breathing. The path twisted and turned, and soon I lost track of both time and distance as the footprints I was following were erased by the wind funneling through the narrow passage. Just as I was about to turn back, convinced I had made a grave error, I heard it again, the rustling, but closer this time, and then, barely audible, a muffled cry for help. "Marcus!" I yelled, breaking into a run. "Where are you?" The canyon opened into a small, amphitheater-like area, and my flashlight swept across the space until I found him. Marcus was slumped against the far wall, bound with old ropes, his face bruised and his clothes torn and dirty. My heart raced as I rushed to him. "Oh God, Marcus, what happened to you?" His eyes flickered open, unfocused at first, then widening in recognition. "John," he whispered hoarsely, "how did you find me?" I didn't answer, focusing instead on untying him. "Can you walk?" I asked. He nodded weakly, and I helped him to his feet, though he nearly collapsed. "Who did this to you?" I inquired as we made our way back through the canyon. "Was it robbers? Drug smugglers?" Marcus shook his head, his eyes wide with a primal fear. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, John. It wasn't human. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human." I wanted to ask more, but getting him to safety was the priority. We hurried through the canyon, Marcus leaning heavily on me. As we neared the entrance, I felt an eerie sensation of being watched. I turned, shining my flashlight back the way we had come. At the edge of the light's reach, a figure stood, tall, impossibly thin, and almost skeletal. Its skin was pale, almost translucent under the beam of my flashlight, but it was the eyes that immobilized me. They glowed faintly in the darkness, two pinpricks of eerie yellow light. The creature stood motionless, silently observing us. Marcus whimpered in fear, snapping me out of my trance. I half-carried, half-dragged him out of the canyon to my truck. I didn't look back or stop until we were speeding down Highway 87 back toward Sandstone. The following days were a blur. I took Marcus straight to Sandstone General Hospital, where he was treated for dehydration, malnutrition, and various cuts and bruises. The doctors were astonished he had survived 3 days in the desert heat with minimal water. Officer Rodriguez came to take Marcus's statement, but he was too shaken to provide a coherent account of what had happened. I told her about finding his jacket at the trading post and discovering him in the canyon, but I omitted the part about the creature. I wasn't sure I believed it myself, and I didn't want the police to think we were both delusional. As Marcus recovered, he told me more about his ordeal. He had stopped at the trading post out of curiosity, hoping to find some interesting old artifacts. That's when the creature attacked him, overpowering him with incredible speed and strength before he could even cry out for help. The creature had dragged him into the canyon, keeping him tied up and barely alive. Marcus couldn't explain why it hadn't killed him outright. "It was like it was studying me," he said, shuddering at the memory. The police organized a search of the area, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of habitation in the canyon or the trading post. They concluded that Marcus had probably been attacked by a mountain lion or a particularly aggressive coyote, and that dehydration and fear had caused him to hallucinate the more fantastic elements of his story. But I knew what I had seen. That thing in the canyon was no ordinary animal. Life in Sandstone slowly returned to normal, but things were never quite the same. Marcus moved away a few months later, unable to bear being so close to where it had happened. I understood. The memory of that night haunted my dreams, and I hadn't even experienced the full brunt of the attack. As time passed, the events of that summer faded into local legend. People would sometimes talk about the thing in the canyon over beers at the local bar, but it was always with a nervous laugh, a way of scaring themselves for fun. I stayed in Sandstone, taking on more responsibilities in the community. I became something of an unofficial protector, always keeping an ear out for any strange occurrences, especially in the desert. I warned people away from the old trading post and the canyon, spinning yarns about unstable structures and treacherous terrain. Most listened, but there were always thrill seekers looking for adventure. Occasionally, we'd chat about the oddity in Dead Man's Canyon over drinks at the Dusty Cactus Saloon, always with a nervous chuckle, spooking ourselves more for entertainment than out of belief. I remained in Sandstone, taking up more responsibilities within the community, becoming somewhat of an informal guardian. I frequently cautioned people against venturing near the old trading post in the canyon, telling tales of its unsafe structures and perilous terrain. While most heeded my warnings, there were always a few thrill seekers eager for an adventure. It was 5 years after Marcus's mysterious vanishing that a similar incident occurred. A young woman named Lily Chun, a geology student from the University of Arizona, disappeared while conducting field research in the area. The circumstances eerily mirrored Marcus's disappearance. Her car was found near the old trading post, and her last known location was the Cactus Creek gas station. My heart sank with dread as I joined the search party. We scoured the desert for days, but found no sign of Lily. Just as we were about to call off the search, I heard a rustling sound coming from the canyon. Driven by instinct, I dashed towards it and found Lily in almost the exact spot where I had found Marcus years earlier. She was in better condition, having only been missing for 3 days, but the haunted expression in her eyes was strikingly similar to what I had seen in Marcus. As I freed her, I heard it again, the soft rustling of fabric against stone. Turning around, I saw it, the creature, unchanged even after 5 years, watching us from the shadows. Its pale, emaciated form and glowing eyes were just as I remembered. This time, I didn't flee. "What are you?" I called out, my voice echoing in the canyon. "What do you want from us?" The creature cocked its head, a seemingly curious gesture. For a moment, I thought it might respond, but instead, it simply faded back into the shadows, leaving Lily and me in the chilling silence of the canyon. Lily's rescue refocused the attention of Sandstone on the events from 5 years ago. With 2 witnesses to the creature's existence this time, the authorities could no longer dismiss our accounts as delusions caused by dehydration. A team of scientists and researchers flooded into our small town, eager to uncover the truth behind these sightings. They set up camp near the canyon, equipped with sophisticated technology to detect and possibly capture the creature. Weeks passed without any sign of it, and some researchers began to doubt Lily and my accounts. But I was certain it was still out there, watching, waiting. Then, on a moonless night, the creature revealed itself once more. I was at the research camp, speaking with Dr. Sarah Thompson, the lead scientist, when all their equipment suddenly malfunctioned. Alarms blared and lights flashed wildly. In that chaos, we saw the creature standing at the edge of the camp, its eerie form illuminated by the floodlights. Under the bright lights, we could see details previously hidden in the canyon's darkness. Its skin was not just pale, but translucent, with a network of veins visible beneath the surface. Its oversized eyes, glowing ominously, seemed to observe everything at once. Dr. Thompson gasped next to me, her voice a mixture of fear and awe. "It's not of this earth." The creature then took a step forward, causing everyone in the camp to freeze. To our utter amazement, it began to morph. Its form shimmered and shifted, transforming into an exact replica of me. A voice resonated in my mind, and I could tell from the reactions around me that others heard it too. "We mean you no harm," the voice declared, using my voice but with an otherworldly tone. "We are travelers, explorers from a world far beyond your own. We came to study, to learn, to understand." Questions flooded my mind, and the answers came just as quickly. "We did not understand your fragility at first," the voice continued. "We sought to study you closely, but our methods were imperfect. We have learned much since then about your physicality, your emotions, your capacity for both fear and wonder. Dr. Thompson regained her composure and asked, "Why reveal yourselves now? Why to us?" The creature, still in my form, turned its gaze to her. "Your species stands on the brink of a great leap. Soon, you will venture out among the stars in earnest. We needed to understand you, to determine if you were ready for the wonders and terrors that await you in the vast expanses of space." "And are we ready?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A smile played across the familiar, yet alien face. "That remains to be seen," it replied. "But you have potential, Charles McDonald. All of you do. We will be watching your progress with great interest." With that, the creature's form shimmered once more, returning to its original otherworldly appearance. Then, in a flash of light that left us all blinking and disoriented, it vanished. In the years that followed, Sandstone became famous. Scientists, researchers, and curiosity seekers flocked to our little town, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the desert's otherworldly visitor. Some claimed to see strange lights in the sky or odd shapes moving in the shadows of the canyon. But the creature or creatures never revealed themselves so openly again. Marcus returned to Sandstone, no longer afraid, but fascinated by what he'd experienced. Lily Chun completed her geology degree and became a leading researcher in the new field of xenogeology, the study of extraterrestrial landscapes. As for me, I remained in Sandstone, continuing my role as a guardian of its mysteries and a chronicler of its hidden truths. "Give me an hour to pack, and I'll be ready to roll," Jack said as he headed off to gather his gear. Meanwhile, I finished loading the truck. The familiar weight of my grandfather's hunting rifle was a reassuring presence as I secured it. I didn't expect to need it, but it's always best to be prepared. An hour later, we hit the road, the early morning mist still clinging to the fields as we left town. Inside the truck, the aroma of coffee from our thermoses mixed with the scent of leather and tobacco from Jack's ever-present pipe. "You know," Jack broke the comfortable silence, "my granddad used to spin yarns about whispering pines. Said there were things in those woods that no man should ever see." I raised an eyebrow at him. "Your granddad also claimed he wrestled a grizzly bear and won, Jack. I think we can take his stories with a grain of salt." Jack chuckled, though his laughter had a nervous edge. "Yeah, I guess you're right. Still, those mountains give me the creeps." As we drove, our conversation lightened, drifting to reminiscences of our youth, the mischief we'd gotten into, and the girls we'd chased. It was familiar, comfortable territory that helped ease the tension that had built up at the mention of the legends surrounding our destination. As we drove, the landscape gradually changed. The flat farmlands gave way to rolling hills, which soon became the foothills of the Whispering Pines. The road narrowed and began to wind its way up into the mountains. By noon, we had reached the base of the range. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks shrouded in mist, the dense forests a dark green blanket covering their slopes. "There's supposed to be a good camping spot near Evergreen Lake," I mentioned, consulting the map spread out on the dashboard. "Should be about an hour's drive from here if the road holds up." Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the tree line as if he expected something to leap out at us at any moment. "Sounds good. You think the fish will be biting?" "Only one way to find out," I replied with a grin. As we climbed higher into the mountains, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees grew taller and more densely packed, their branches reaching out over the road like grasping fingers. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns, creating an ever-shifting play of light and shadow. An hour later, we arrived at Evergreen Lake, a stunningly beautiful spot that could make you forget all the worries of the world. The lake was like a mirror, reflecting the surrounding mountains and trees in its crystal-clear waters. A light mist hung over the surface, lending the scene an ethereal quality. We set up camp in a small clearing near the shore, the ground soft with pine needles. As Jack wrestled with the tent poles, I gathered wood for a fire, keeping an eye out for any signs of wildlife. "Hey, Sam," Jack called out, his voice tight with tension. "You see those marks on the trees over there?" I walked over to where he was pointing. Sure enough, There were deep gouges in the bark of several pines, about 7 feet up the trunk. They looked like claw marks, but larger than any bear I'd ever encountered. Probably just an old grizzly marking its territory, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Nothing to worry about. Jack didn't look convinced, but he went back to setting up the tent without further comment. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lake, we sat by the fire. The smell of cooking trout mingled with the smoke and pine. The forest around us came alive with the sounds of night creatures, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. You know, Jack, his voice low, I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched. I was about to dismiss his concerns when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound like something large moving through the forest. I strained my ears, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. Probably just the wind, I said, but I found myself reaching for the rifle just in case. As we turned in for the night, I couldn't help but wonder if coming to Whispering Pines had been such a good idea after all. Little did I know, our adventure was just beginning, and the true test of our courage and sanity lay ahead in the depths of these ancient, whisper-filled woods. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the mist from the previous evening burned away by the rising sun. As I emerged from the tent, stretching the kinks out of my back, I found Jack already up, stoking the remnants of last night's fire. "Morning, Sam," he greeted me, his voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the tranquility of our surroundings. "Sleep well?" I nodded, though in truth, my night had been restless, filled with half-remembered dreams of shadowy figures moving just beyond the edge of my vision. "How about you?" Jack shrugged, his eyes darting to the tree line before returning to the fire. "Well enough, I suppose. Heard some strange noises in the night, though, like something big moving around out there." I was about to reassure him when I noticed something odd. The ground around our campsite was disturbed with large, unfamiliar tracks leading from the forest to the edge of our clearing and back again. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Too large for a bear and with an unsettling, almost human-like shape to them. "Jack," I said slowly, "take a look at this." He came over, his face paling as he saw what I was pointing at. "What the hell made those, Sam?" I couldn't hide the chill that ran down my spine despite the morning sun's warmth. "I'm not sure, but we need to be extra cautious today. Let's stay close during our hike." After a quick breakfast of coffee and trail mix, we packed our day packs and set off. Our goal was to reach the summit of Raven Peak, known for its breathtaking views of the wilderness. The trail was initially easy, meandering through towering pines and across babbling streams. As we ascended, the forest transformed. Trees became gnarled and twisted, their branches outstretched like grasping hands, and the underbrush thickened, complicating our trek. A heavy silence enveloped the woods, punctuated only by our heavy breathing and the crunch of pine needles underfoot. "Sam," Jack spoke up a few hours into our hike, "do you feel that? Something's off, right?" I felt it too, an eerie, pressing wrongness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath in anticipation. "Yeah, let's stop and figure out where we are," I suggested. We found a small clearing and settled on a fallen log, pulling out the map as a twig snapped in the distance. We spun around, but it was just shadows and silence. "Maybe we should head back," Jack proposed, his voice strained with tension. I was about to agree when something in the distance caught my eye, a glimpse of a stone structure through the trees. Driven by curiosity, I headed towards it, despite Jack's protests. What we discovered in that secluded clearing was haunting. A crude stone altar, ancient and weathered, adorned with bizarre, shifting symbols and surrounded by scattered bones, some unmistakably human. "What is this place?" Jack whispered, pale-faced. Before I could answer, a low, menacing growl filled the clearing. We turned slowly to see a figure emerging from the shadows, towering, with elongated limbs and pale, almost translucent skin that seemed to absorb the light. Its face was a horrific sight, black pupilless eyes and a mouth too wide, filled with sharp teeth. As it moved towards us with eerie grace, my mind struggled to comprehend the sight. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Jack's arm and pulling him back to the trail. We plunged through the underbrush, branches lashing against us as we fled. The creature followed silently, its presence only marked by the occasional snap of a branch. The trees blurred into a green tunnel. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but fear propelled us forward. Jack stumbled, and I dragged him up, knowing stopping meant death. When we finally burst out of the tree line and back to our campsite, we wasted no time. We threw our gear into the truck, and I slammed the tailgate shut. As I jumped into the driver's seat, I saw a pale figure lingering at the clearing's edge. "Get in!" I shouted to Jack, who scrambled into the passenger seat. The truck's tires spun in the soft earth before catching grip, and we sped down the mountain road, constantly checking the rearview mirror for the nightmarish figure. It wasn't until we were miles away, with the mountain shrinking in the distance, that we allowed ourselves to relax. Jack broke the tense silence. "What was that thing, Sam?" I shook my head, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I don't know, Jack, and I'm not sure I want to." As we drove back to River Est, the day's events took on a surreal quality. Had we really seen what we thought, or had the legends and our imaginations deceived us? One thing was clear: our lives would never be the same. The encounter had opened our eyes to a world beyond our understanding, where ancient legends roamed, and the line between reality and nightmare was indistinct. Unbeknownst to us, our brush with the unknown was just the beginning. The creature had awakened a deep-seated quest for answers within us, leading us down a dark and perilous path into the heart of a mystery as old as the Whispering Pines themselves. The drive back was tense, filled with silence as Jack and I lost ourselves in our thoughts, trying to make sense of our experience. As the familiar structures of our hometown appeared, a mix of relief and dread washed over me. We were safe, yes, but could we ever return to our normal lives after what we'd seen? I dropped Jack off at his house, and we exchanged a few words. "Take care, Sam," he said hoarsely. "Let's keep this between us for now, all right?" I nodded, understanding his hesitance to share our story. Who would believe us after all? As I drove home, the day replayed in my mind. The mysterious tracks, the ancient altar, the terrifying creature. Every creak and groan of my house made me jumpy as I tried to sleep, but rest was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those haunting, black orbs staring back at me, heard the subtle rustle of something lurking just out of sight. By morning, I was exhausted, yet no less disturbed. In the days that followed, I tried to resume my routine, but everything felt skewed. Colors seemed duller, sounds more distant. I found myself constantly scanning the tree line, half expecting to see that elongated, pale figure lurking there. It was on the fourth day after our return that Jack showed up at my door, looking worn and frantic. "Sam," he said urgently as I let him in, "we need to talk." I could tell by his wild eyes and the tense way he glanced around that what we had experienced in the Whispering Pines was far from over. As Jack's anxious gaze darted around, expecting danger at any moment, we sat down at my kitchen table, engulfed in a tense silence until he finally spoke. "I've been digging into what we encountered," he said in a hushed tone, "and Sam, I think we've stumbled upon something ancient, something significant." He pulled out a stack of documents from his bag, old newspaper clippings, printouts from obscure websites, and handwritten notes, and spread them across the table. Headlines over decades spoke of hikers missing in Whispering Pines, strange lights over the mountain range, and a local man's encounter with a so-called forest demon. "It's been happening for years, Sam," Jack continued, his fingers tracing the dates on the aged newspaper clippings. "People disappearing, weird sightings, unexplained events. It's not just recent." He showed me records going back to the early 1800s when the first settlers arrived in this area. One article from 1932 caught my attention, a grainy photo of what appeared to be a tall, thin figure at the edge of a forest clearing. The figure was blurry, but its elongated limbs and the unmistakable aura of menace were clearly visible. This is what we saw," I whispered. Jack nodded gravely. "The locals back then named it the Whispering Pine Wraith. They said it lured people into the deep woods, never to be seen again. But here's the thing, Sam. These stories aren't just old settlers' tales. I spoke to my grandmother, and she told me about the Crow legends of a creature in those mountains called Ika Alalia, the Long Walker. A shiver ran down my spine as Jack delved deeper into the legends. According to the stories, the Long Walker was once a man, a powerful medicine person who sought to dominate the spirit world but went too far, performing forbidden rituals. The spirits cursed him, warping his body and trapping him between worlds, neither fully spirit nor flesh. I leaned back, overwhelmed by the implications. So, what you're saying is this entity has been here for centuries and no one has been able to do anything about it? Jack shrugged helplessly. Who would believe it? Most dismiss the disappearances as accidents, the sightings as hallucinations or hoaxes. And those who do believe, what can they really do against something like this? We fell silent, the weight of our newfound knowledge pressing on us. Finally, I spoke up. We have to do something, Jack. We can't just sit on this, knowing that thing is out there, possibly harming others. Jack looked at me, fear and resolve in his eyes. I was hoping you'd say that, because I think I know where we need to start. He pulled out another document, this one a map of the Whispering Pines region, with an area circled in red, deep in the heart of the mountains, far from any known trails or campsites. This area keeps coming up in the old stories, Jack explained. They call it the Whispering Grove. It's supposedly where the Long Walker performs its rituals, where the veil between worlds is thinnest. I studied the map, noting the rugged, isolated terrain. It won't be easy getting there, I mused. We'll need to prepare, gather supplies, and probably bring backup. Jack nodded. I've been thinking about that. Remember Tom Redhawk? He used to lead those wilderness survival trips. And Sarah Whitecloud from the Cultural Heritage Center. She knows more about the old stories than anyone. I agreed, and over the next few days, we quietly reached out to Tom and Sarah. To our surprise, both were open to hearing us out, though understandably skeptical at first. We met at my house, away from prying eyes and ears, and laid out everything we knew. Tom, a stocky man in his 50s with a weathered face and calloused hands, listened intently, his expression growing more serious by the minute. Sarah, a petite woman in her 40s with long black hair streaked with gray, occasionally interjected with questions or bits of lore that supported our story. When we finished, Tom was the first to speak. I've heard rumors about strange things in those mountains for years, he said slowly. Never gave them much credit, but I can't ignore what you're telling me. If there's even a chance this is real, we have a responsibility to investigate. Sarah nodded in agreement. The stories of the Long Walker have been passed down in my family for generations, she said. I always thought they were just legends to keep children from straying too far into the woods. But if what you're saying is true, we need to face this, for our people and for all those who've been lost to the mountains over the years. And so, our small band of investigators began to plan. We gathered maps, survival gear, and weapons, just in case. Sarah provided us with protective charms and herbs used in traditional Crow rituals, while Tom drilled us on wilderness survival techniques. As the days passed and our departure date drew near, I found myself growing more anxious. The memory of our encounter in the woods was still fresh, the terror still raw, but beneath the fear was a growing sense of purpose. Whatever this entity was, spirit, monster, or something beyond our understanding, we had to confront it. The night before we were set to leave, I stood on my back porch, looking out at the stars twinkling above the distant silhouette of the Whispering Pines. The mountains loomed dark and mysterious, holding their secrets close. Tomorrow, we would venture into their depths, seeking answers to questions that had haunted this land for centuries. As I turned to go back inside, a cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it what sounded like a faint, distant whisper. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Whatever awaited us in those mountains, I knew our lives would never be the same again. The morning of our departure dawned gray and misty, as if nature itself was trying to dissuade us from our mission. We met at the edge of town, our vehicles loaded with gear and our hearts heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. Tom arrived in his battered Jeep, packed with additional survival equipment. Sarah joined us in her small hybrid, a stark contrast to our rugged vehicles but practical for the initial drive. As we set out following the winding road into the mountains, an uneasy silence settled over our group, the gravity of what we were about to do weighing on each of us. The weight of what we were undertaking, seeking out a creature steeped in the lore and mystery of the mountains, hung heavily on all of us. We'll switch to my Jeep once we hit the off-road sections. Tom broke the silence as the mountains drew closer, his Jeep ready for the rugged paths ahead. We all nodded, my stomach churning as the familiar sights gave way to the wild, untamed expanse of the Whispering Pines. The roads roughened, the forest thickened, and soon, even Tom's rugged Jeep could take us no further. "From here, we go on foot," Tom declared, turning off the Jeep's engine. We loaded our bags with gear for several days, Sarah ensuring we took protective items she felt necessary. The forest felt different as we entered. It seemed more alive, more sentient. The trees towered, their branches gnarled like twisted fingers, and the dense underbrush slowed our pace. Every snapped twig or rustle in the leaves jolted our nerves. Sarah led, consulting an old hand-drawn map. "The Whispering Grove is about a day's hike from here," she informed us. "But the legends say the Long Walker can alter the landscape, making paths vanish and leading travelers astray." As if on cue, a thick fog rolled in, cutting our visibility down to a few feet, the air chilling and the forest falling eerily silent, devoid of any wildlife sounds. "We should camp," Tom suggested as dusk approached. Pressing on now would be reckless. We found a small clearing, set up our tents, and gathered around a modest fire. The fog thickened, and unsettling sounds whispered at the edge of our hearing. Branches cracking somewhere in the darkness. "Stay close," I reminded everyone, my hand never straying far from my rifle. Sleep was fitful, haunted by vivid nightmares of being chased through endless woods by a shadowy figure just out of sight. When morning came, the fog had lifted, but the oppressive feeling lingered. We continued, following Sarah's map closely, yet the landscape around us seemed to shift inexplicably. Familiar landmarks gone, replaced by unfamiliar rock formations and clearings. By mid-afternoon, we reached the stone altar Jack and I had found previously. This time, however, the symbols on the altar pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light, the air shimmering as if heated. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her face ashen. "The heart of the Whispering Grove, the domain of the Long Walker." Silence enveloped us, the air thick and heavy, making each breath a struggle. Suddenly, a low, omnipresent growl echoed around us, emanating from everywhere and nowhere. "Get ready." Tom's voice was calm, but carried an underlying note of fear. We formed a defensive circle, weapons drawn. The growling intensified, and shadows in the forest coalesced into the distinct, terrifying form of the Long Walker. It stepped into the clearing, its elongated, pale form seeming to draw on the light around it, those endless black eyes fixing on us, its mouth too wide, filled with needle-like teeth, perhaps forming a sinister grin. "Ika Alicia," Sarah called out, her voice a mix of tremor and resolve, addressing the creature by its name from the legends, signaling our intent to end its reign of terror. The creature tilted its head, regarding us with a curiosity that was almost palpable, then spoke. Its voice was like the wind through dead leaves, the creak of ancient trees. "And me? Foolish mortals, I am as old as these mountains, as eternal as the forest. I cannot be ended." As it spoke, reality itself seemed to distort. Trees bent at unnatural angles, the ground underfoot rippled like water, and the very fabric of the world seemed to fray. But then Sarah began to chant, her voice rising over the surreal chaos. She circled us with herbs and powders, creating a barrier of light at our feet. Tom and Jack joined her chant, bolstering her with their own voices, and I found myself drawn into the ritual, reciting ancient words of protection. As we chanted, the form of the Long Walker flickered and wavered, as if it were no more than a mirage in the intense heat of the desert. It lunged at us, those grotesquely long arms reaching to rend and tear, but it could not breach the circle of light that now protected us. It howled in frustration, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the mountains themselves, sending wildlife fleeing in terror. "Now," Sarah shouted, "while it's weakened." As it weakened, we each retrieved a small pouch that Sarah had previously handed to us, filled with a blend of sacred earth and herbs, and bits of our essence she had instructed us to include. United in purpose, we hurled the contents at the Long Walker. The reaction was swift and intense. Where the mixture met its flesh, the creature's form began to disintegrate, unraveling like thread from a tattered cloth. It let out a wrenching scream filled with agony and wrath, a sound destined to haunt my dreams indefinitely. Then, in a final explosive burst of otherworldly light, the Long Walker's form shattered, dissipating into myriad specks of darkness that soon vanished, leaving behind only a residual feeling of wrongness and a pungent scent of ozone. We stood, breathless and overwhelmed, struggling to grasp the reality of what had transpired. Around us, the forest began to normalize, the distorted trees straightening, the unnatural quiet replaced by the typical sounds of wildlife returning. "Is it truly over?" Jack inquired, his voice hoarse with exertion. Sarah, looking both relieved and somber, nodded. "For now, at least," she confirmed, "we've driven it back to the spirit realm from which it came. But such beings are never truly destroyed, merely dormant, awaiting another opportunity." As we descended the mountain, lost in our thoughts, I knew our lives had been irrevocably altered. We had confronted something unfathomable, peered into the abyss, and emerged somehow intact. The Whispering Pines would never appear the same to us. Each rustle of leaves and each shadow at dusk now carried the weight of our encounter. Yet, through this ordeal, we had forged a bond that would endure, a pact amongst guardians sworn to protect a secret not meant for the wider world. Emerging from the forest with the sun setting behind us, I cast one last glance at the mountains. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a slender figure atop a distant peak. I blinked, and it was gone, likely just a figment of my strained senses. Or so I reassured myself. Yet in quiet nights to come, as the wind whispered through the trees, I occasionally wondered if it was truly over, or if the Long Walker was still out there, biding its time. In the subsequent days and weeks, as life in Rivercrest slowly regained a semblance of normalcy, for us, Jack, Tom, Sarah, and myself, nothing could ever return to how it was. We had glimpsed beyond the veil of mundane existence, engaged with an ancient darkness, and survived to tell the tale. In the weeks that followed, we gathered often, sometimes discussing our ordeal, other times sitting in silence, comforted merely by the presence of others who understood. About a month after our return, during one of these gatherings, Sarah raised a crucial question. What should we do with this knowledge? The debate that ensued was intense. Tom, ever cautious, doubted anyone outside our circle would believe our story. Jack, anxious and impassioned, insisted we had a duty to warn others, to prevent future harm. I proposed a compromise. We needn't reveal everything, but should take measures to safeguard others, perhaps by alerting hikers to potential dangers and working with park authorities to restrict access to the most perilous areas of the mountains. Sarah suggested we also preserve and disseminate the old stories, not as literal truths, but as cautionary tales to deter the unprepared from venturing into the wilderness. Over the next months, we implemented our plan. Tom leveraged his outdoor connections to circulate warnings about the treacherous conditions in the Whispering Pines without revealing the supernatural nature of our encounter. Jack penned a series of articles for the local newspaper, embedding subtle cautions within tales of the region's history and folklore. Sarah dedicated herself to her cultural work, sharing traditional Crow stories that subtly underscored the lessons of respect and caution regarding the natural and spiritual worlds. As for myself, I spent more time in the mountains, patrolling the periphery, vigilant for any signs of the unusual, steering unwitting adventurers away from the hidden depths where darker truths lurked. Time passed, life went on. Tom eventually retired, his legacy one of fostering respect and preparedness among budding wilderness enthusiasts. Jack's literary efforts flourished, his publications threading hints of our secrets within broader narratives of local legend. Sarah became a venerated figure within the community, bridging ancient wisdom with contemporary understanding. And I remained the quiet sentinel, the watchful presence safeguarding the boundaries of a world most were fortunate never to encounter. We never again saw the Long Walker, not directly, but there were moments, under cover of mist or the cloak of night, when I sensed its presence, a fleeting shadow or a whisper carried on the wind, reminders of the vigil we must maintain. Now, as I sit here, an old man reflecting on a life intertwined with wonders and horrors, I ponder the legacy we leave. Will the stories we've shared suffice to shield future generations from the lurking dangers of the Whispering Pines? Will the Long Walker, or entities like it, one day resurface to challenge new generations of unwitting souls? The answers are elusive, but of one thing I am certain. The world holds more mystery and majesty than most will ever realize. To those who follow, who find themselves on the precipice of the unknown, I offer this counsel. Let curiosity guide you, but let caution guard you. Respect the power of the wilds. Remember the tales of those who walked these paths before you. Some secrets are best left undisturbed, some whispers best left unheeded. For in the end, it is not the monsters we conquer, but how we navigate the shadows they cast that defines us. Our encounter with the Long Walker altered us, yes, but it also revealed the strength found in unity, in the bonds forged in adversity. As for me, Samuel Blackfeather, I will continue my vigil as long as I am able. And when my time comes to join my ancestors, I will do so knowing I have done my part to protect this land and its people. The Long Walker may still linger in the shadows, but so too do those of us who stand ready to face it. Guardians of a truth that must never be forgotten, custodians of a legacy as ancient as the whispering winds themselves. And so, as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, I close my tale. But remember, dear reader, each ending is merely the beginning of another story. The whispers continue, the shadows deepen, and the great mystery of life endures. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and above all, stay true to the indomitable spirit that dwells within us all. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its long shadows over the Whispering Pines, I sat on my porch, reflecting on the journey that had irrevocably changed my life and those of my companions. The air was crisp, and the rustling leaves whispered secrets of the ancient forest, reminding me of the mysteries that still lay hidden within its depths. In the quiet of the evening, I contemplated the events that had unfolded and the creature we had encountered, an entity that was as old as the mountains themselves. The following morning, I awoke with a sense of purpose. Although we had driven the Long Walker back to its realm, the experience had left an indelible mark on me. I felt a responsibility not just to guard the secrets we had uncovered, but also to ensure that the safety measures we had put in place were sufficient to protect those who ventured into the woods. With Jack, Tom, and Sarah, we had formed a silent pact to watch over the forest and its mysteries, but I knew that our efforts needed to be fortified. I decided to reach out to the local ranger station to discuss the possibility of increasing patrols in the area, especially near the old paths that led to the deeper parts of the Whispering Pines. The rangers were receptive, aware of the strange occurrences that had been reported over the years, and agreed to collaborate on keeping the public informed and cautious. Meanwhile, Jack had taken to documenting our experiences in a more detailed manuscript, hoping to preserve the account for future generations. He spent days in his study, often late into the night, piecing together the narrative from his perspective, intertwining it with historical data and personal reflections. He intended to keep it unpublished, stored safely away, unless a time came when the truth needed to be revealed to a wider audience. Sarah continued her work at the Cultural Heritage Center, enriching her presentations with subtle references to the respect one must have for nature and its unseen forces. Her workshops began to draw attention from beyond the local community, attracting scholars and enthusiasts who were interested in the folklore of the region. Without disclosing too much, she educated them on the significance of the old stories, hinting at the truths veiled within. Tom, ever the outdoorsman, organized wilderness survival workshops, focusing on the skills one might need if they found themselves lost or in danger in the wilderness. He emphasized the importance of being aware of one's surroundings and respecting the old legends that spoke of the spirits and creatures of the forest. His courses became incredibly popular, drawing in adventurers and hikers from all over, eager to learn from someone with a deep connection to the land. One crisp autumn day, as the leaves began to change color, painting the landscape in fiery hues, I took a walk to the edge of the Whispering Pines. Standing there, looking into the dense woods where shadows played between the trees, I felt a chill run down my spine. The forest seemed to watch me, its silent observer, acknowledging my presence at its threshold. It was then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper carried on the breeze. It was not a sound I could easily describe, but it felt as if the forest itself was speaking to me, its voice low and melodic, yet tinged with an underlying warning. I strained to listen, but as quickly as it came, it vanished, leaving me with a sense of unease. That night, I discussed the experience with Jack, Tom, and Sarah over dinner. They listened intently, each familiar with the peculiarities of the Whispering Pines. It might be nothing, I suggested, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. Or perhaps it's a sign that our work is far from over. We've always known that dealing with the Long Walker might not be the end of it, Tom replied, his voice serious. These woods are ancient, and who knows what else lurks within them? Sarah nodded in agreement. The legends have always spoken of the forest as a living entity, a keeper of secrets. Maybe it's trying to communicate with us, to guide us, or warn us. We decided to keep a closer watch on the area, organizing regular walks and inviting some of the rangers to join us. Our excursions were often quiet, contemplative affairs, where each of us, lost in our thoughts, paid close attention to the subtle signs of the forest. Months passed, and the seasons changed, blanketing the forest in snow and then ushering in the fresh blooms of spring. The Whispering Pines remained a beautiful but haunting place, its mysteries as deep and impenetrable as ever. But with each passing day, our resolve to protect its secrets and ensure the safety of those drawn to its beauty only strengthened. In the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees and the world seemed to hold its breath, I felt a connection to something greater, a link to the ancient spirits of the land, to the stories of old, and to the unseen forces that govern the natural world. And as I continued to watch over the Whispering Pines, guarding its secrets, I knew that our encounter with the Long Walker was just one part of a larger story, a story that was far from over, a story that would continue to unfold as long as the wind whispered through the ancient trees.